Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. And today, everyone, we have our favorite parenting expert back with us. Christina McGhee is here. Hi, Christina. Thank you for coming on. Happy New Year. You and I haven't seen each other since for a couple of weeks at least. So I'm excited that we're able to talk this week about, let's dive into the topic quickly for people. We're going to talk about the situation that so many people, actually, I just mentioned to you, for me, in my practice, it's been the majority of families where parents and children continue to live together under one roof while the divorce is unfolding. While the divorce process is still being considered. I mean, it's really, it can be a very lengthy period of time, and it's a difficult time. And as we sit here in January of 2022, it is an extremely common situation for those facing divorce. So we're going to talk about your tips for co-parenting while you're getting divorced and living under one roof, all from the perspective of putting your children at the center, not in the middle of your divorce, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for those of you who have not listened before or haven't had the opportunity to hear one of Christina's other fantastic episodes, which I recommend you go listen to and will be linked in the show notes. Christina is a parenting expert. She's my go-to parenting expert. Her book is Parenting Apart. For those who are watching the video, you can see it on the screen. You can get it on my website, or you can get it on her website, which is divorceandchildren.com. And honestly, everyone, this is the Bible. This is the go-to. Actually, it's more like an encyclopedia. This is the book that you go to when you are co-parenting under whatever circumstances, married, separated, divorced, living, whatever. This is the parenting book, folks. And you just go to the first pages to the list of contents and find whatever the issue is that you're facing, and you'll go and find 5 to 7 pages of absolute golden nuggets that are going to help you get through that. So always my number one resource recommendation for parents. My number one go-to resource and recommendation is talk to Christina. Christina also works with parents, both individually or as a couple. She prefers to work with parents together, but she will work with them separately at any point in the process, or not even in the process, to help them co-parent better. So you can reach out to Christina on her website, through her website as well. And we'll have all that in the show notes, but let's dive in, because I've just been talking about how difficult this is, and nothing that we're going to say today is going to take away from the fact that we acknowledge it's difficult to live under the same roof. But you do point out that there are two positives, like two upsides, silver linings to the situation of living together under the same roof while going through the divorce process. So let's talk about the good first.
Yeah, well, it certainly advantages for sure when you're residing under one roof, that a lot of times, co-parents just overlook, because we get really invested on, we want to get out. We don't want to have contact with the other person on a daily basis. Things are tense. But if you leverage the situation, there are some distinct advantages. And one of the biggest one is it gives your kids time to transition, right? So when you think about immediately moving into a 2-household situation, kids have to deal with the loss of seeing a parent every day right away, a new parenting schedule, a new environment. They may be a family home, but then there's also this new home that pops on the scene. And that's a lot of change all at once. So for kids, they get to hear the news. They have both parents available. And you can give them some time to get adjusted to this idea of time with each parent individually, mom time, dad time, right? How we work the schedule. The other thing is that the two of you have time to adjust to parenting on your own, which is big. I mean, even if you're in a situation where you feel like, well, I take care of everything anyway.
I was going to say, there are people out there going, they don't spend any time with the kids.
I don't need them. Right. it's always helpful to have another set of hands on deck, right? For those moments. It just is. And so you also, in addition to, figuring out how to parent solo, you're going to have to acquire different skill sets, because whether you realize it or not, you each have strengths and weaknesses, different things you bring to the parenting relationship. And you may have to up your game in certain areas, or make some adjustments, or not rely on each other for certain things. So it's a big transition. Doing it in increments, right, while you're all in one home, can be really advantageous. The other thing is that when we talk about how time sharing arrangements are going to work, if you start moving in that direction where you come up with a time sharing arrangement, so you have an opportunity to try it out with the kids.
Yeah.
And if it's not working, again, you're able to go in and make some adjustments. And you figure out, kind of what's working, what's not working, where kids really struggling, what's hard for them. And then you can adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing for parents to know, that very often they will spend a huge amount of time and effort through the process working on a parenting plan, and then are surprised when that parenting plan doesn't exactly work or doesn't fit their family perfectly. And I just want to emphasize, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually, being open-minded to the fact that it's going to need to mutate and change and morph, because even if you work out the perfect parenting plan right from the start, your kids are going to get older, their lives are going to change. And so it's almost impossible throughout the course of your lives as co-parents that things aren't going to change anyway. So that can start right from day one, when you think you're going to do this and you find out tomorrow that didn't work, right?
Right. Well, and the other piece of that is, like, the marriage is ending, but your children's needs are going to continue. They're going to remain a constant. And one of the things in parenting, whether you're married or divorced, is that your kids are going to change and grow. And, that parenting plan that you spent so much time crafting could be something you need to throw out the window 2 weeks later, because somebody got involved in an extracurricular activity, or you needed to change schools, or things weren't working the way you thought they would. I mean, the realities of family life are still going to exist. And as parents, you're going to have to figure out a way to address those. And when you can really focus more on how can we make this work for the kids? How can we be flexible, and address some of those issues on the front end, the better those parenting plans are going to serve you in the long run, because you're talking about all of those. You're talking about the really meaty, important stuff. The parenting plan, as you and I have talked about before, isn't just a time sharing arrangement.
No.
It really needs to be so much more. It's like, how are we going to continue to parent together apart?
Yeah. No, which parenting apart. And I know there are those people you and I just talked about. I posted something this morning about, trying to manage your emotions as you go through the process so that it doesn't become an all out battle. And I got all the, yeah, but responses. Yeah, but he's a jerk. Yeah, but she's high conflict. Yeah, but we are not talking about living in a situation where there's danger, where there's domestic violence, where, you have extremes of we're talking about your average. And I'm going to use that because most of the time people are not happy with each other. It is a difficult time, but it is not a situation that requires the courts to separate out the households and force someone to go live somewhere else, or there is a violent situation where there must be a division of households. Most families find themselves in this sort of limbo state of, we're moving into a process of separating, but we're all still living together. So that is the situation we're talking about. We are not talking about those, not outlier, but those higher level conflict situations. If you're not safe, if your children aren't safe, then that's a whole different. I have episodes on domestic violence, on restraining orders, on getting out of the house, getting them out of the house. Very important to know, but not what we're talking about here. So let's talk about how you can, you were talking about, you used a great word and I wish I could remember it. It was, if you can, I'm just going to use elevate the situation, or if you can go into the situation and maximize how you approach it, rather than just let it happen. Because that's what I think most people do, right? They have the talk, they tell their spouse they're getting a divorce, they tell the kids they're getting a divorce, and then they just like think everything's just going to be whatever it is. One of your first tips is that you shouldn't wing it.
Right.
So what should you do?
And that's across the board. Like even once you are 100% crystal clear, this is the direction we're moving. And I wouldn't advise that anybody take any steps about talking to the kids or moving out until you're sure, because that's really confusing situation for the children when parents are maybe yes, maybe no, maybe yes, maybe no, we're not really sure. That's a lot of anxiety for kids. So you need to make sure. Right. And if you are 100% sure, then that's the time you need to create a plan before you do anything else. Plan for talking to the kids. Before you can talk to the kids, you need to think about what's this transition going to look like? What is our time frame? Instead of being impulsive or reactive, because I think that's where the wheels can really come off, is when we feel it. We react, we start taking all these kind of actions without really thinking about the long-term consequences for ourselves and for our kids.
Yeah.
So
I do want to point out to everyone. Well, I want to point out to everyone, you have a wonderful episode on how to tell the kids that very much helps parents to plot out the conversation. So I'm going to link to that. Go listen to that. And then we also, my first episode of the year was with Kate Anthony, and that was how to tell your spouse that you have decided to get a divorce. Inherent in both of those episodes is that you do not just wing those conversations. You plan them out, and there's a way to do that and to do it the best way possible. So this is a further extension of that, right? This is, now you're going to go into the process. Don't just go into it and expect it's all going to just happen or unfold for you because this is the way it goes. You have power to talk to your co-parent and start making plans about how you would like it to unfold. So what are some of the things you should consider when making that plan?
Well, you want to think through the basics, like how long will you be living in one home? Right? And maybe you don't have a clear-cut answer, but just think generally, are we talking weeks? Are we talking months? What makes the most sense? Deciding how you're going to share care of the children. I would suggest, if you're making that decision, once you've told the kids, move into talking about how you're going to be spending time differently. How are you going to get to that place of learning to parent solo and not depend so much on each other? How are you going to minimize tensions for the sake of the kids? How are you going to handle disagreements when you're having those days where you're not real jazzed about each other, or you're not seeing eye to eye? Right? Because it's not just the all-out conflict that really is difficult for kids. It's also all that subtle tension, right? The icy glares, the not speaking to each other, the one-word answers, the stiff body posture. All of that impacts kids. They soak it up like a sponge. Kids are so intuitive.
I know.
And so much more aware than we give them credit for. So, how are you going to handle that?
That's one of those things you and I think have both heard probably hundreds of times from parents, is our kids have no idea that this is, we never fight in front of the kids. Our kids have no idea. Let me just say it right now. Your kids know something, right? Trust us. And they probably know a heck of a lot more about what's going on than you think they do. And a lot of it is exactly what you're talking about. And you can't, completely control your body language or all of that, but the rolling eyes, the heavy sighs, the slamming doors, all of that is something that they definitely pick up on.
Yes, absolutely. And with kids, the not knowing creates even more anxiety because they they pick up on all this stuff. So when they're not getting information, when parents aren't talking about what's going on, then they start making up a story on their own. They start putting the pieces together and not always accurately. So they make assumptions, and that, that uncertainty is just so hard. It's so
Yeah.
stressful for kids. So I think once you're clear about this is the direction we're moving, the first step needs to be making a plan. And I always recommend that parents go somewhere outside of the household, go to a coffee shop, go to a restaurant, someplace in public, neutral territory, and say, all right, regardless of how we feel about each other, what our differences are, we have one thing always in common. We love our kids and we want what's best for them. So let's use that in terms of moving this discussion forward, and let's talk about some of these things. And if you get a copy of my book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to how to create a schedule and a parenting agreement that works for kids. And it is literally just tons of questions for you to think through. Because when you're in it, there are a lot of things that just are not on our radar. So it helps to have a guide, something to look at to kind of walk you through the questions. If that's not working for you, maybe you need to find someone you can talk to. Think about what needs to change and what needs to stay the same for our kids, and what's that going to look like just in practical terms. Now, once you've nailed that down, then you can kind of take the next step and start planning on having a conversation with your kids, which, like you said, we've talked about in the other episode. And if you're getting ready to have that conversation, I would highly recommend you go and listen to it so you can really plan through that conversation with your kids.
Yeah. And another episode you and I did was how to build a parenting plan that works for your kids, because parenting plans aren't for parents, they're for kids. So that's another one. I'll link to that. But you also mentioned something that I think is critical for parents to keep in mind, because it's so easy to lose sight of, is most parents, whatever the situation might be, have some things in common. One of those things you just mentioned, right? That they both love their children and they want what's best for them. We rarely find someone in the paradigm that is like, yeah, I couldn't care about those little rugrats at all. No, whatever. And so that's one commonality. You say to stay focused on what you have in common. I assume that's one of the things, but what else are you thinking of?
I think the other thing is to really figure out, what is your why for what you're doing? Like, if you're staying in one home, why? Is it for financial reasons? Is it due to the pandemic? Is it for your kids to give them time to transition? Regardless of how you feel about each other, chances are you're going to have some things you're going to agree on. And usually it's, how can we make this easier for kids? How can we approach this in a way that is going to secure the life that they know and give them the childhood that they deserve?
Right. One thing I think of when I get here to this point, because many parents want what's best for their kids, but they don't agree on what's best for their kids. And a dynamic that can come up is one parent, say, being the one who went out and got your book, and they read something there and they say to the other parent, what's best for our kids is that we do this. And so you have to do this. One thing, couple of things there. If you're the one telling your spouse what's best for your kids, it's less likely they're going to take it well. It's better if you can have a third party involved, or give them the book and let them read it themselves if they're going to do that. But often this is a conversation where it is helpful to have a third party who has information and expertise present, someone like you, or like a mediator, or a parent, another professional, a therapist, who, if you both agree you want what is best for your kids, but you can't agree about what is best for your kids, it can be helpful to have a third party help you understand what is best for children. And I know that's something that you do a lot of. You explain developmental stages for children and what they need when it comes to transitions and spending time with each parent and communication and all of that. So something to keep in mind is, we're not talking necessarily about you telling your spouse or co-parent what's best for your kids and they should just do that. We're talking about perhaps having to get information from outside sources that you both trust or can, are willing to take advice from so that you can dive into what's best for your kids.
Well, and I would also say that if you can't get access to a professional quickly, right? Because some of this is like on the ground and it may take time to find the right mediator or someone like myself or a therapist. Is there someone that you both mutually trust who could play a neutral role, who could just help you guide the conversation? Because what happens is that when we're talking with each other, we each have these perspectives, emotions, feelings about this big change in the family, about the breakup, and we may need a third person who's not emotionally invested to help us just get grounded and break out of those emotions. And it's hard to do. It's really, it's hugely challenging. But if we have somebody else who's participating in that conversation, that may help you like nail down the basics until you can get in to see somebody. And I think the other piece of it is be willing to agree to disagree. To be good co-parents, you do not have to do everything chapter and verse exactly alike. You don't have to be, in complete 100% agreement. My guess is for most of us, we're not that way when we're married. Why would we be that way when we're divorced? My husband, for example, there are a lot of things that we do very differently. But when you're emotionally invested in that relationship, you're certainly more flexible, you're more understanding, you're more tolerant.
Yeah.
And when that emotional investment isn't there anymore, oh my gosh, it's a whole different ball game. So just remember, the relationship may have changed, your children's needs have not, and you each bring strengths, things that you do really well and things you may not do so well to the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's so, I love that phrase. The relationship may have changed, but your children's needs have not. And if you need, write that on the top of a piece of paper. I have a lot of listeners who take notes when they listen to the episode. So bold and underline that one, people, because I think that's when we start to stray in our mind about what's best for kids. Sometimes it's great to have a mantra or an intention that can bring you back to center, so that you swallow that inflammatory comment you want to make to your co-parent suggestion. Another topic or another tip that you have is, a basic, I think, but really important because it kind of goes to that land of boundaries and the learning how to set some. You need to have some ground rules as you go into this process.
And a lot of times we forget that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think if you can have those conversations again on the front end, you're going to make things much better for your kids. So once you've set the time frame, you've kind of got a plan in place. You need to have just some general ground rules of how you're going to engage with each other. How you're going to communicate everyday details when tensions are high. And I would recommend, start off right away with thinking about something like a co-parenting app, or agreeing that we're going to only communicate through email, or we're only going to communicate through text. I really advocate for a co-parenting app because it puts everything in one place. And I know you and I are on the same page about this, Susan. Instead of having to go, did I get that through a text? Did they send me a voicemail? Did they send me an email? You go to the co-parenting app, it's all in one place. There's so many advantages. So again, while you're in one home, you have an opportunity to try some out, see what works, and make a decision about what to use. But I think nailing down that everyday communication, especially when we're not feeling so warm and fuzzy about each other, is really, really important.
Yeah. That co-parenting app is really a critical factor. And I love that you're talking about using it while you're still living together. I have many intact families. In fact, my family, my blended family, my bonus family, we used it for a number of years. My listeners know my favorite app is Fayr, Fayr. They just make life easier. Also, going through the process, there are other benefits that you can find out about. I'll put the link in the show notes. But a wonderful point is to again set some boundaries around your time with your kids and how you're going to manage things in the household. Because the worst thing in the world, I think, for people is when, they always say, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, right? We've all heard it. There are people go into this divorce process and have assumptions. Like one of the parties might think, well, because I've told you we're getting a divorce, I expect everything's going to change and you're going to start stepping up and filling the dishwasher properly and taking the kids to school in the morning. Whereas the other parent thinks we're fine, we're getting a divorce, but we're going to do everything the way we always have. And
Right.
so it also comes down to communication, like setting those ground rules by communicating.
Yes, yes. And I would suggest having a written agreement. So
Nice.
just nail down the basics. And people are like, do we really need to write it down? Yes, you do. Is it legally enforceable? No. Is it something that you're going to use so you can nail the other parent? See what we know. You write it down for clarity and for accountability. So we're writing this down with, this is our understanding. I have the same understanding that you do. So when we talk about, for example, Wednesday evenings, you're going to be responsible for the kids. You're going to be the on-duty parent. Well, for me, maybe evenings are 5 p.m. Maybe for the other parent, it's 7 p.m. after I've had time to wind down. It means I take care of tuck in and bath, but I don't have to cook them supper.
Right.
So you need to be specific and you need to be clear. Let's write this down. It doesn't have to be overly wordy, doesn't have to be overly formal, but here are some bullet points about how we're going to move forward. Here's how we're going to handle disagreements. If tempers start to flare, one of us starts getting really overwhelmed, giving each other a timeout, maybe have a cue word. How are you going to handle the scheduling? How are you going to handle the parenting, the day-to-day stuff? The communication, big ticket items that are clearly going to change, and you can always add to it. But the benefit of writing it down is really to make it crystal clear for both of you. And we don't have this other thing when we are really emotionally charged, memories aren't working so well. So I may have agreed to something and not necessarily remember that's what I agreed to. Writing it down just helps all the way around.
I could not agree more. And I would just say for those who are nervous about writing something down, because people, as they go into divorce, start to get all nervous about putting things in writing, put a disclaimer at the top. We're creating these intentions to help us navigate the next couple of months as we live in the house. We understand that these may change, but for right now, we agree to try to follow the following. And if you have to put it in language that you both can accept, but Christina, I think, is 100% correct that it's extremely helpful for everyone. And certain elements of what's in there, including why you're still staying in the house, I think maybe it's a good idea to be clear about those things with your kids as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So, you may be clear about the why, but you also need to let your kids know, because they may be wondering, all right, so if the two of you are still living under one roof, why does anything have to change? And this is especially challenging for kids when you may have a situation where you and your co-parent, maybe the tension is very minimal, or maybe you're both mutually in agreement that the divorce needs to happen and you want to keep things amicable. And there are those situations. Well, for kids, it's like, okay, but why can't we keep just doing this?
Yeah.
Why does anything have to change? It's really hard. So I think you need to also make that a part of your conversation with your kids, why you're staying in the same house, why you've made that choice, regardless of what it is. Just be clear with your kids that this is a permanent decision, and you're committed to moving things forward. For now, this is what life is going to look like, and here's why.
Yeah, I think, that goes back to what we've talked about in other episodes, is that, it's not a one and done conversation with your kids when you're going through divorce, that you tell them a divorce is happening and then you just leave them out there
Right.
just to figure it out on their own, which unfortunately many parents do, because it's uncomfortable to talk with your kids about these things. It's hard. And many parents have the idea that the less they say to their children, the easier it is for their kids because it's not involving them. There is a fine line to involving your children in the divorce and giving them information to help them process the divorce.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other piece of that a lot of parents struggle with is like, well, if we're in the same house, right? Do we really need to tell them yet? Like, shouldn't we wait? How do you time it? And that's difficult to call sometimes, but I recommend that parents have that conversation with their kids. Once they're clear, they need to be planning to have a conversation with kids and think that through. Timing is critical. Some of it depends on the age of your kids, so with young kids, telling them as soon as you make the decision, but you're not, moving out for 6 months, might not be the same as you would for a 13-year-old who's very well aware of what's going on. So get some support around that, get some information, make that decision. But I do believe that you should absolutely have a conversation with your kids as soon as you're clear.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, your kids know a heck of a lot more, even the little ones, or the littles, as you call them, which I just
Yeah.
love. I love that phrase. You have littles. So another thing I mentioned, because we do see those situations all the time, where at least one person thinks, well, sure, we're getting a divorce. We've agreed we're going to stay in the house. Why does anything need to change for now? Like, why don't we just keep doing what we've always been doing? And I think you say avoid doing what you've always done.
Right. Well, when you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got,
Yeah.
There's a reason that the relationship wasn't working.
Right.
And in order to move life forward, you're going to need to do some things differently. The other trap that I see lots of parents fall into is they make a decision, oh yeah, we're going to split up, but they continue to communicate the same way. They continue to fight the same way. Kids, nothing really changes for the kids, except that, they're stuck moving their stuff back and forth between two households. So I think if you really want to make things work for your kids, you've got to make a commitment to doing things differently, and breaking free from that history that you have together is not easy. You have a certain way of communicating with each other and engaging and making decisions. And it doesn't mean you have to throw everything out, but you need to figure out where you need to gain that separateness, that independence, and what you need to change.
Yeah. It may be a gradual process, but if there's one time in life when you need to grow and you need to feel the pain of that growth, because it is a difficult process and you're already going through difficulty because divorce is a difficult process, but you're going to need to grow in some ways as parents. There's no perfect parents. I'm a bonus parent, but no, not perfect. We've all had to grow. This is a time when you definitely, because it wasn't working the way it was. So that change has to happen now. And then, final point, but I think this may be even one of the most important ones, because this is where people get stuck, not only during the process, whether you're living under the same roof or not, but often for years and years or lifetimes after the divorce is final. They're stuck in the past. They're stuck on what brought them to the point of divorce. And that can be especially hard in the beginning days of divorce, in the beginning days living under the same roof, where the hamper's not getting the socks in it and the dishwasher's getting loaded improperly and whatever, the drinking is still going on. So how do you change the focus off what went wrong, what brought you to this point?
Right. Well, I think that it's there's two parts. One is we have to adjust our expectations, right? And I talk with parents about this all the time. I had a coaching client. She's like, I've told him about this, and this. I want to talk with him about the kids. We need to be communicating as co-parents, and I want him to be involved in the decisions. And he just won't have a conversation, like 10 minutes and he's checked out. So my question for her was, well, what was it like when you were married, when you were together? did you have lots of co-parenting conversations? Did you really get into the details about how the kids were parented and have long discussions? And she said, no, absolutely not. He was horrible at communicating. And I said, okay, so what's
Ding, ding,
changed
ding,
here?
ding, ding, ding. Yeah. So divorce, and magically he's a whole different human being.
Right. And I spend a lot of time telling parents, don't go to the hardware store for milk, because no matter how many trips you make, you're never going to find what you're looking for. And yet we have this idea, right, that because we're divorced and we're co-parenting now, all of a sudden there's going to be this stellar communication. There's going to be this enlightenment. He's going to do things different. She's going to do things differently. No, chances are there will be some changes, and there may be some really positive changes that come out of it. Because a lot of times, when you take that tension out of the relationship, and you can really focus on parenting your kids, it can be a game changer for so many. It can really make the parenting relationship work much better. We can grow as parents and as individuals, but it is a process, and it usually doesn't happen day one. So we need to do some adjusting of our expectations. But the other piece is that you need to take a step back and think about what worked, right? And a lot of times we miss that. I had a coaching client I was working with, and she was so frustrated and worried because they couldn't agree on a parenting plan. Like we're never going to agree. He's never going to budge. He's absolutely certain it needs to be this way. And I just don't know how we're going to get there. I want some strategies. Basically, she was wanting to know if I could help her change him.
Yes, I heard that loud and clear.
And when we started talking about the situation, they were living in the same household. And as we were talking, she was talking about how they had both sat down and agreed on finances. They didn't have any issues with that. They really co-parented very well together, even though they were going through the process of separating. They're still in one home. He was even open to reading a parenting book, and they were reading the same book. And I said, look at all these positives. Look at all these things you have going for you. Are you telling me that you can, you've got all these things that are really working in your relationship, and you're going to spend all your energy focusing on the one thing? That's difficult. So if you can get here with these things, what's it going to take you to get to this one? So and it had never occurred to her that actually there were all these things that were working. So when parents are getting stuck, I ask them, all right, when was a time when you made a good decision together? When was a time when you worked really well? When's the time you had a great co-parenting conversation? How do you repeat that success? What about that worked? What were the conditions? What kind of things did you do? A lot of times it also has to do with our attitude moving into the conversation. How open are we? Or are we really defensive, ready to jump on it? And just how our own perspective. Are we approaching it with positive intent, trying to see the best in each other instead of the worst in each other? And again, when you lost that love and feeling, not easy to do.
We get that. I've been there. I've lost that love and feeling. But that's such a good point. And it's interesting because a common mediation technique, or a technique that we use as mediators, is when the parties are in a space where you can tell they're both very clearly focused on where they can't agree. We will remind them of, and often we'll just go, well, let's go back and just look at here. So you've come to an agreement on blah, 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 blah. And you've got a really great, schedule around this. And just reminding people that they have been able to work together is often enough to unlock a log jam, or at least put people into a different frame of mind. But one of the biggest pitfalls of divorce is that it's even easier to fall back on what's gone wrong in the past. And it's our default. Mm-hmm. It's he's always done this. She's always been this way. this is how we argue. This is how we talk. This is what we do. And so, yes, not staying stuck in that past. I always tell clients, I mean, the whole reason the podcast is Divorce and Beyond is I really want people to be focused forward on the future, not on the past and what went wrong. So I think that if we are talking, right now we're talking to those parents who are finding themselves in the very difficult situation of continuing to cohabit under the same roof, co-parent under that same roof, provide stability and security and love for their children. These are just 6 really, solid tips to get you started on a path to make the living together under that one roof workable for all of you, but also to find those 2 positives that you were talking about, or to maximize the advantages that you actually might not have ever noticed that you're getting out of this situation.
Right. And I really like the tip you gave earlier when you said, okay, write this down.
Yes.
Put it somewhere where you'll see it often. I mean, I am a huge believer in giving ourselves visible reminders. And so during this time, when things are clearly going to be really challenging, what can you do to kind of keep what's most important to you top of mind? Do you have a mantra? Do you have a quote? Something you picked up from a podcast or an article or a book, just a one-liner or 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Put it as a screensaver on your phone.
Here's the
put it on your refrigerator.
Yes. I always say tattoo it on your forehead, but I don't mean that seriously. But seriously, honestly, with that phrase that you use, the relationship may have changed, but your kids' needs have not. And really, it's not even that your kids' needs may have not changed. They may have been increased. Your kids may be and are likely even more needy of certain things from their parents right now than they may have been in the past, or they may be in the future. This is a time truly where your children need to be the focus of your process, and in the center, not the middle. And I do want to talk about that for a second as well, that phrase, because that concept of a child-centered divorce is something that you and I both take very, very seriously, and really want to help more professionals be prepared to help families make that transition in a child-centered fashion. So you've actually created an amazing training for professionals. So for a moment here, I just want to talk to my listeners who are in the divorce space, who are trying and working so hard to help families in transition. You have a new training that's actually a specialist certification program called the Co-Parenting Specialist program through Susan Guthrie. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to be covering in that program.
So the focus of the program is really to help professionals get connected with how families experience this process, both parents and children, on an emotional level. What does that cycle of divorce feel like when kids are experiencing loss, when parents are experiencing loss, but not just thinking about grief in terms of how you're feeling, but it also often those feelings translate into behaviors. And so what behaviors are you looking for? What are some of the things that you should be paying attention to kind of clue you in on where your clients are emotionally, where their kids may be emotionally? And often when we have that information, it also helps us become a better guide. Because I really believe that divorce professionals, whether you're a coach, a family lawyer, a mediator, a collaborative lawyer, you are a point of influence.
Absolutely.
And you really have the opportunity to significantly change the landscape of how these families go through the divorce process. It's like being a first port of call. And quite often, when by the time parents find me, the wheels have clearly already come off.
Unfortunately, right? If they got to you earlier, you'd be able to help in a different way. I know you help your families at all points in the process.
At all stages of the divorce process. But for the most part, when people make the decision to split up, usually their first thought is, I've got to find a mediator. I've got to find a family lawyer. I've got to, we get to the business at hand of how are we going to negotiate this piece of it. They don't necessarily always think about, ooh, I got to find somebody who's going to help me think about my kids or help me sort through my own feelings about this process. Or maybe you've even tried therapy and it wasn't, exactly successful. You did it as a couple, or, there's a lot of hits and misses as you go through this process. But being that first port of call for families is, I believe, such an important role. And so the goal of this training is really to equip professionals with information about the emotions, about the ages and stages, because there's a lot of things that go on with kids developmentally.
Yeah, right. And they change.
Yes.
They're going to grow up.
And when we're crafting these agreements, it's really important to have a good handle on what's really important for a 3-year-old, what's super important for a 13-year-old. How are they different when you have kids of multiple ages? What are some things you need to take into consideration? And often, especially with the emotional aspects of divorce and the age and developmental stage, there can be things that get misunderstood or misinterpreted by parents that become points of conflict. When a lot of times, if parents had the information on the front end, that would shift that, right? But if we don't know it, we certainly can impart it to the parents that we're working with. We also dive into just kind of what are some of the core components of developing a successful co-parenting relationship. Some of them we've touched on in this podcast, but there are a lot more. And then we'll also have a 4th day, which I'm really excited about. And that's talking about developing parenting plans. How do we take all this information and really put it into action and create and craft plans that truly stand the test of time, that don't just fall apart after the ink's dried, that we're really giving parents an opportunity not to just come to an agreement that's enforceable, but giving them an opportunity to redefine family life, to establish what that new normal is going to look like, and really walk them through some of these really important issues and decisions and needs that their kids have. And so the focus of that is really creating a space for us to talk through these kind of things, to really dig in and explore them and how they relate to the realities of working with separating and divorcing parents.
Yeah, I think it's really truly a revolutionary sort of training course. It's not a revolutionary concept. You've been talking about it forever, and it's what you do at the core of what you do. But you're 100% correct. This goes back to what I said earlier in this episode, that sometimes parents need that third party who knows children and what's best for children and develop, all of these issues that you just talked about, to help the parents to be able to hear what works best for their children, because it's very hard for them to hear it from each other under these circumstances. So to have the professional that you select to work with, or professionals that you select to work with, trained in this type of information, this support that they can then pass on to their clients, is really a kind of missing critical component in the entire process, because it goes back to, looking at parenting plans as a timeshare arrangement. And, we're going to get, just let me throw out that phrase that I hate so much, 50-50 parenting. I hate that 50-50 parenting phrase. And I hear it every day of my life as a divorce professional. And until I think the professionals are trained in what children need and in a child-centered divorce, I think that the entire process will remain focused on this timeshare aspect and percentages and, how many hours here and there, which those aspects come into this, but they are not geared in what really is the most important thing. And that is what the children need. So I'm excited about that. For my professionals out there, we're starting our first certification course, which is already, I think, halfway to sold out in February. And then we're going to be doing it again in May. So go to mostynguthrie.com to check that out. But Also, for the listeners who are parents who want resources, we've already talked about how to get parenting apart. You can get it on the Susan Guthrie website. You can get it on the Divorce and Beyond Pod website. You can get it on Divorce and Children website. Where else can they get information about you, Christina? Reach out to you, and you have some fantastic free resources, I know, for people. So
Yes.
where is that all located?
So the best place to find me is divorceandchildren.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Christina_McGhee. And I'm also on Facebook at Divorce and Children. So if you're wanting to connect with the community or just get some small little doses, of co-parenting information, those are great places to start. On my website, I do have a free resource that I offer to parents, and it's a resource guide. So one of the challenges when you're going through this is when you want help, how do you find it? What do you look for? And everybody has different needs. So I did all the work for parents by putting together reading list, books for kids, books for yourself, different websites you should check out, different topics you should think about. Like if you're dealing with high conflict or parent alienation, I've got resources in there to help you with that. Recommendations for videos and movies, supportive programs. So if you're looking for resources and you want to kind of get a jump start, hop on over to my website, sign up for my list, and you'll get a PDF copy of that right away. I also have a follow-up article that kind of supports all the things we've talked about. So if you scribbled some notes, but you want,
you want it in nice written format.
Yeah. You'd like to read it over again. We'll put a link to the blog that will have all of these tips, and there's a lot of information there. So chances are, if there's something else you're kind of wanting some more information on, you can certainly find something there that's going to be helpful for you.
Yeah. And just, I want readers or listeners to think about that. This is a parenting experts list of recommended resources. So, this is the ultimate way to find the resources that you might need. Christina has carefully vetted all of the information on there. And one thing or two things that I know are on that list, and I don't want to leave this episode without mentioning, Christina was also the consultant for Ellen Bruno to the first Split film. You all have met Ellen and heard about Split in a prior episode, What Children Really Think About Divorce. There is a sequel coming out, and it's called Split the Teen Years.
Split Up the Teen Years.
Split Up the Teen Years. And Christina, again, was, of course, very involved in the project. I've had an opportunity to see that. It will be debuting very soon, I believe, literally within weeks. Of course, that will be covered on the podcast. But any little tips or insights or insider information about the sequel that you want to share?
Oh, gosh. It's such a fabulous film.
It is.
It is. And so for those who may not be familiar with Split's a documentary that was created for kids by kids. It's just children who have parents who've gone through divorce, talking about how it feels when parents part. And it is a beautifully put together film. The children are between 6 and 12 years of age, and it covers a broad range of topics, but it's not just here's how your kids have been damaged kind of film. And actually, there's a lot of hope, resilience, and just a really great message. The goal of the film is to let kids know that they're not alone, and to really give parents an opportunity to see what kids like their own but not their own are thinking and feeling about divorce. So in follow-up to this film, Ellen's kept in touch with the original kids who were in the first film. And one of the things that just kind of kept weighing on her mind is I wonder if there's more to the story. And so she decided to find out, and she went back and re-interviewed 11 of the original 12 and had conversations with them as young adults as they were in their phase of launching, graduating from high school, moving out of the house, going to university, setting out on their own. And it is fascinating to hear these conversations. And it is very clear that there are still some things that stay with kids. I have always referred to divorce as kind of like a thread that runs through children's lives. It's not a process that just ends at some point, but it lasts a lifetime. The question is how it plays out. And as parents, how we're supporting our children, the choices that we're making today are very much impacting their tomorrow. And I think that the second film, Split Up the Teen Years, really brings that into sharp focus.
Yeah, it is, the original Split film, what is a revelation. I have never had a parent or a child or a professional watch it without it having an impact, a deep impact on them. I will tell you, Split Up the Teen Years is probably even more impactful because it's a little peek into the future for people. And I do want to emphasize there's good, there's bad. There, it's life, right? It's these 11 kids and how their parents' divorce and their experience of divorce has carried forward these 6 or 7 years into the future for them. You will laugh, you will cry, you will be entertained, you will take things away, you will watch it more than once. It will help you and it will scare you and it will do all of those things. But I think of it as both of them as required viewing. And I hope that in the world that we live in, they are going to become even more a part of the landscape for people going through divorce. So those resources are out there as well. I will, of course, link to Split, the original film, in these show notes. And as soon as the sequel comes out, we're going to have a whole big premiere, folks, a big to-do for this. So Christina, I'm looking at the time on taping this episode, and we have created a special double episode. I hope everyone has enjoyed this special double episode. We went into it, and such an important topic that, I'm going to break this down into a Monday and a Thursday. So as you're listening to this end portion, it'll be Thursday after the first episode. But truly critical and an important time for people. We know as you're sitting here in January, in divorce month, it's really for so many of you, the beginning of what's going to now be, a new chapter in your lives going forward and a new, process and life in your books. But these tips from Christina are the golden nuggets that we wanted to pass on. They are going to help you in that situation where you're under the same roof so that you can find golden nuggets to help you find the silver lining of living together. So as always, Christina, thank you so much for joining me. It's always wonderful to have you here. And listeners, write in. Christina, she's an amazing resource. If you are a parent going through divorce or co-parenting and have questions, write in. Christina is a wonderful human being. And when I reach out to her and ask her to come on, she scrapes up a little time in her very busy schedule. So she'll come back and answer questions. Just reach out, divorceandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Send your questions in. So thank you, Christina.
Thank you. It's been fabulous as always.
As always. Thank you.